August 17, 1943, 22,000 feet above Regensburg, Germany. Second Lieutenant Thomas Ferebee squints through the Norden bombsight's eyepiece, watching the Messerschmitt factory crawl into his crosshairs. His fingers rest on calibration knobs worth more than the B-17 carrying them. The device between his knees, 50 pounds of gyroscopes, gears, and classified optical glass, represents America's billion-dollar bet that precision could defeat mass, that science could end slaughter, that 10 men in a flying fortress could hit a target the size of a warehouse from 4 miles up. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The propaganda said bombardiers could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet. The Norden Company's advertisements promised pinpoint accuracy that would spare civilians and destroy only military targets. General Hap Arnold told Congress the bombsight would revolutionize warfare itself, making strategic bombing humane for the first time in human history. But as Ferebee watches German fighters tear through his formation, as flak bursts shred the aircraft around him, as the bombsight's delicate mechanisms vibrate from cannon fire and his hands tremble from 40 below temperatures, a different truth crystallizes. The most secret weapon in America's arsenal had been sold to Germany 5 years earlier for $3,000 by a spy named Hermann Lang. The precision that would win the war existed only in carefully staged demonstrations and government contracts, and the mathematics of aerial warfare, running through analog computers no more powerful than pocket calculators, were about to collide with reality measured in burning bombers and shattered dreams. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Carl Norden understood obsession better than most men. Born in Semarang, Java in 1880 to Dutch parents, educated at the Federal Polytechnic Institute in Zurich, the same institution where he briefly encountered a fellow student named Vladimir Lenin Norden, possessed the temperament of a perfectionist and the social skills of a recluse. Colleagues at Sperry Gyroscope Company, where he worked beginning in 1911, called him difficult, abrasive, self-centered. Navy personnel who worked with him later nicknamed him Old Man Dynamite for his explosive temper and uncompromising standards. He saw himself not as an inventor but as a designer, believing only God could truly invent. His name wouldn't even appear on patents for his greatest creation. Norden's path to military innovation began with ship stabilization systems, working alongside Elmer Sperry on gyroscopic equipment that could keep naval gun platforms steady in rough seas. But the partnership dissolved in 1913 over personality conflicts and salary disputes. Sperry disliked Norden's vile black cigars. Norden resented Sperry's demand that he sign over future patents. They parted ways with mutual animosity that would shape American bombsight development for decades. In 1920, the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance approached Norden with a problem that conventional wisdom deemed unsolvable. World War I bombing had relied on crude vector calculations, pilots estimating wind speed and direction, calculating release points manually, hoping their arithmetic matched reality. The course-setting bombsight represented the era's peak achievement, a slide rule calculator that bombardiers used to determine aim points based on simple trigonometry. Accuracy hovered around 3% under ideal conditions. In combat, with weather, altitude variations, and enemy fire disrupting calculations, bombing became random destruction dressed up as military science. Norden saw elegant physics where others saw impossible engineering. A bomb falling from an aircraft followed predictable trajectories governed by gravity, air resistance, and initial velocity. If you could measure the aircraft's exact speed and direction, compensate for wind drift in real time, and provide a stabilized sighting platform that kept the target motionless relative to the bombardier's view, you could transform aerial bombing from guesswork into precision science. The challenge was reducing university-level physics calculations to mechanical processes that could be performed continuously during combat operations by young men who'd never finished college. Norden began his work in characteristic fashion alone, obsessively, demanding perfection from himself and everyone who assisted him. He worked from his Manhattan apartment, using equipment borrowed from the Whitman Lewis Aircraft Company, handcrafting prototypes with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. His first experimental bombsight, delivered to the Navy in 1923, failed spectacularly during testing. Mechanical components jammed, gyroscopes drifted, the optical system fogged in cold temperatures. The Navy, recognizing both Norden's genius and his limitations, assigned Theodore Barth to work with him in 1923. If Norden represented brilliant antisocial innovation, Barth embodied practical engineering and human relations skills. The partnership would last until both men retired after World War II. Barth took Norden's designs and made them manufacturable. He dealt with contractors, smoothed over conflicts, and kept everyone happy while Norden focused on perfecting his physics. The breakthrough came gradually through the late 1920s. Norden developed a stabilized platform using precision gyroscopes that maintained consistent orientation regardless of the aircraft's movement. This platform supported an optical telescope that allowed bombardiers to sight targets, while the bombsight's analog computer continuously calculated release points based on changing flight conditions. The system measured the aircraft's ground speed by tracking how quickly terrain moved through the field of view, automatically compensating for wind drift without requiring manual calculations. Most revolutionary was the autopilot linkage. During the bombing run, the bombardier literally flew the aircraft through the bombsight, making adjustments to keep the target centered in his crosshairs, sent electrical signals to the bomber's flight controls, allowing precision course corrections that no pilot could match manually. The aircraft became an extension of the bombardier's intent, responding to his delicate inputs with mechanical precision. By 1927, Norden and Barth had produced their first successful bombsight, the Navy Mark 11. Testing under controlled conditions showed remarkable results. Bombardiers hitting targets from 10,000 feet with accuracy that exceeded anything previously demonstrated. The Navy, impressed but cautious, began limited production. Carl Norden incorporated his company in 1928, agreeing to manufacture 80 Mark 11 sights for $384,000. The patents, designs, and manufacturing specifications transferred to government ownership for the remarkably low price of $250. The device's operating principles required extraordinary precision during pre-flight setup. Before each mission, bombardiers had to right the stabilization platform, a time-consuming process of comparing the gyroscopic platform's attitude to small spirit levels viewed through a glass window. Even tiny errors in leveling would compound throughout the bombing run, translating into massive trajectory errors by the time bombs reached their targets. Temperature presented constant challenges. The Mark 11 contained delicate optical components and mechanical parts that required consistent operating conditions. At bombing altitudes, where temperatures plunged to 40 below zero, lubricating oils congealed, glass fogged, metal contracted. The Army Air Corps, recognizing these limitations, eventually purchased electrically heated blankets specifically for the bombsights, wrapping them around the mechanisms to maintain operational temperatures. October 1931 brought the competitive test that would define American bombing doctrine. The Navy evaluated two Norden designs against each other, the production Mark 11 and a developmental prototype called the Mark 15. Under ideal conditions, slow speeds, clear weather, and low altitudes, the older model achieved 23% direct hits. The new Mark 15 scored 50%. Under perfect circumstances, half the bombs dropped landed within 75 feet of their targets. The Army Air Corps immediately acquired the Mark 15, redesignating it the M4. Here was the weapon that would validate American strategic bombing theory. Here was the technology that would allow precision attacks on military targets while sparing civilian populations. Here was the answer to European doubts about daylight bombing effectiveness. The Mark 15, and its subsequent improvements, became the famous Norden bombsight that equipped America's bomber fleet throughout World War II. But a critical gap existed between testing range performance and combat reality, a gap measured in lives, burning aircraft, and shattered expectations. That gap would define the true story of the Norden bombsight, transforming America's most closely guarded secret into a cautionary tale about the difference between laboratory precision and battlefield chaos. The security apparatus surrounding the Norden bombsight grew into an elaborate theater of classification that served multiple purposes, some legitimate, others purely strategic. By the mid-1930s, as war clouds gathered over Europe, the device carried secret classification, though it would later be downgraded to restricted, the lowest military classification level. The gap between perceived secrecy and actual security would prove embarrassingly wide. Bombardier trainees took solemn oaths to protect the bombsight with their lives if necessary. Training manuals instructed them to destroy the device rather than allow capture. Initially, this meant firing their service pistols into the mechanism, a dramatic image that never actually occurred in combat. Later procedures called for thermite grenades, though these too were rarely used. The ritual of protection exceeded the reality of threat. Storage procedures bordered on absurd. At operational bases, bomb sites remained in climate-controlled vaults under armed guard. Before each mission, a jeep carrying an ordnance technician and 2 armed escorts delivered the devices to waiting aircraft. Bombardiers installed them personally, under supervision, then covered them with canvas shrouds that couldn't be removed until the bombers were airborne. After landing, the entire process reversed: cover the bombsight, remove it from the aircraft, return it to the vault under armed guard. The security measures served propaganda purposes as effectively as military ones. Newspapers wrote breathlessly about America's secret weapon. Magazines speculated about the technology that would revolutionize warfare. The movie industry incorporated the mysterious bombsight into plots about espionage and heroism. Carl Norden's company encouraged the mythology, knowing that public perception of revolutionary capability helped maintain government contracts and forestalled competition from Sperry Gyroscope and his former employer and continuing rival. The most enduring myth that the Norden could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet became gospel despite having no basis in combat performance. The phrase appeared in countless articles, training films, and recruiting materials. It promised precision that the device could never achieve under battlefield conditions, creating expectations that reality would cruelly violate. But the greatest security failure wasn't poor performance, it was espionage that had compromised everything before the war even began. Hermann Wilhelm Lang had arrived in America in 1927, a 19-year-old German immigrant with engineering training and something most Americans didn't know: a history as a Nazi stormtrooper in the Weimar Republic. He'd even participated in Hitler's beer hall putsch in 1923 before leaving Germany. In America, he became a naturalized citizen in 1939, found employment as a draftsman and assembly inspector at the Carl Norden Corporation, and gained access to the nation's most classified bombing technology. Lang's position gave him overnight access to technical drawings and specifications. He worked methodically, copying classified documents in his kitchen at home while his family slept. The precision required for bombsight manufacturing meant extremely detailed drawings, every gyroscope specification, every optical measurement, every electrical connection documented with engineering accuracy. Lang reproduced them all from memory and careful tracing. In October 1937, Lang met Nikolaus Ritter, a German Abwehr intelligence officer operating in New York. The connection was established through the Duquesne spy ring, a German espionage network that would eventually become the largest spy operation ever prosecuted in American history. Lang informed Ritter he had complete access to Norden bombsight plans. The strategic value was immediately obvious. On January 9, 1938, Lang completed his betrayal with theatrical simplicity. He placed the copied plans inside a hollowed-out wooden umbrella casing and personally handed the package to a German steward aboard the SS Reliance, bound for Bremen. For this, he received $1,500. But the plans weren't complete. Critical details remained locked in Lang's memory rather than transferable to paper. In summer 1938, Ritter arranged for Lang to travel to Germany personally, where he would help German engineers construct a working prototype from the stolen specifications. Lang's reception in Berlin exceeded any spy thriller's imagination. He met with Hermann Göring himself, Hitler's second-in-command and head of the Luftwaffe. For an additional $3,000, Lang spent weeks reconstructing details from memory, explaining tolerances and assembly sequences, demonstrating operating procedures. German engineers took notes, asked technical questions, and began developing their own precision bombsight based on American designs. The Carl Zeiss company would eventually produce the Luftfernrohr 7 Lotfe 7 for short, incorporating principles stolen directly from Norden's work. The German sight differed in some respects. It could view targets directly ahead of the aircraft, whereas the Norden required bombardiers to sight at angles. The Lotfe 7 proved somewhat simpler to operate and maintain, but the core principles, gyroscopic stabilization, continuous trajectory calculation, and autopilot integration, came directly from Lang's espionage. When German engineers examined the stolen plans, they found American precision engineering equal to their own renowned capabilities. Ironically, the Luftwaffe ultimately decided their own Lotfe 7 was superior to the Norden design. They gave captured American bomb sites minimal consideration, believing their adaptation had improved upon the original. This German confidence would matter less than the fundamental strategic difference in bombing doctrine. Germany had committed to dive bombing for ground support rather than high-altitude precision bombing of strategic targets. Japan never developed bomb sites as sophisticated as Allied designs, and their need for high-altitude bombing remained minimal throughout the war. The FBI arrested Hermann Lang in June 1941 as part of a massive roundup of the Duquesne spy ring. 33 German agents fell in what J. Edgar Hoover called the greatest espionage prosecution in American history. The 1945 Academy Award-nominated film House on 92nd Street would dramatize the operation, cementing the FBI's reputation for counterintelligence work. Lang received 18 years for espionage plus a concurrent 2-year sentence for violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act. After serving his time, he was deported to Germany, but by then, the secret was thoroughly compromised. German engineers knew everything about the Norden's operating principles. They'd examined crashed B-17 seconds, interrogated captured bombardiers, and studied recovered bomb sites from shot-down aircraft. The elaborate American security measures had protected nothing except public ignorance. The most closely guarded military secret of World War II had been sold to the enemy for less than $5,000 by an insider with overnight access to classified drawings. The mythology persisted anyway. Americans continued believing their bombsight represented revolutionary technology that Germans couldn't match. Security theater continued throughout the war: the armed guards, the vault storage, the solemn oaths, the covered instruments. Perhaps the theatre served purposes beyond technology protection. Perhaps it maintained morale, encouraged careful handling, or simply justified the massive investments in bombsight production and training. By war's end, Norden and its subcontractors had produced 72,000 M9 bombsights for the Army Air Force alone, costing $8,800 each. The Navy had its own production runs: Victor Adding Machine Company, Remington Rand, and other manufacturers had retooled entire factories for bombsight assembly. The total investment exceeded $1 billion, making it the second-largest secret weapons program after the Manhattan Project that created the atomic bomb. That investment would be judged not by technological sophistication or security measures, but by results measured in burning cities, casualty statistics, and the gap between promised precision and actual battlefield performance. The mathematics were about to collide with reality over the skies of Germany, where young bombardiers would discover that pickle barrel accuracy existed only in peacetime demonstrations and government propaganda. Combat would reveal a different truth entirely. The cold hit bombardiers like a physical blow. At 25,000 feet over Germany in winter, temperatures plunged to 60 below zero. Staff Sergeant Robert Morgan, ball turret gunner aboard the Memphis Belle, watched his breath freeze instantly into ice crystals that coated the inside of his oxygen mask. Bombardiers wore electrically heated suits that frequently malfunctioned, silk gloves to prevent skin from freezing to metal surfaces, and multiple layers that made precise manipulation of the Norden's delicate controls nearly impossible. The bombsight itself fought against the cold. Despite heated blankets wrapped around the mechanism, lubricating oils thickened to syrup consistency. Gyroscopes that required perfectly smooth operation stuttered and jerked. Optical components fogged with condensation that froze into obscuring ice crystals. The precision instrument, designed for laboratory conditions, now operated in an environment that violated every assumption its creators had made. Second Lieutenant Charles Ryan, bombardier aboard the B-17 Battle Queen with the 390th Bomb Group, understood the gap between training and reality before his first combat mission. Training had occurred at Childress Army Airfield in Texas, where clear weather, calm, air, and no one shooting at you created perfect conditions for demonstrating bombsight capabilities. Instructors praised accuracy rates that seemed to validate the pickle barrel promises, but over Germany, everything changed. Ryan's pre-mission checklist consumed precious time while enemy fighters assembled for attacks. Leveling the stabilization platform required steady hands and clear optics, difficult when the aircraft bounced through prop wash from other bombers in the formation. Calibrating the bombsight demanded accurate airspeed and altitude data, but airspeed indicators varied by 10% between aircraft, and barometric altimeters shifted with pressure changes that bombardiers couldn't predict. The fundamental design of the Norden assumed stable flight conditions during the bombing run. The bombardier needed at least 60 seconds of straight and level flight to lock onto the target, allow the analog computer to calculate wind drift and ground speed, and position the aircraft precisely over the release point, 60 seconds. An eternity when German fighters attacked from 12 o'clock high, when 88mm flak guns fired from below, when staying straight and level meant offering an unmaneuverable target to weapons designed specifically to destroy bombers. Most critically, the Norden's brilliance worked only when bombardiers could actually see their targets. Cloud cover over Europe averaged 60%. Industrial haze from German factories obscured aiming points. Smoke from earlier bombing runs drifted across target areas. The device that promised pinpoint accuracy became useless when bombardiers couldn't identify what they were aiming at through the optical telescope. August 17, 1943, brought these contradictions into brutal focus during Operation Double Strike, the combined raids on Regensburg and Schweinfurt that would become shorthand for the gap between strategic bombing theory and battlefield reality. The plan embodied American confidence in precision bombing doctrine. The 3rd Bombardment Wing would attack Messerschmitt aircraft factories in Regensburg with 146 B-17 seconds, then continue south over the Alps to land at bases in North Africa, the first American shuttle mission of the war. The 1st Bombardment Wing would follow 10 minutes later with 230 flying fortresses targeting ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt. The timing was critical. By splitting German fighter defences, each bomber stream would face reduced opposition. But English weather destroyed the carefully choreographed plan before it began. Dawn on August 17th found airfields across East Anglia shrouded in thick fog. The Regensburg force waited for conditions to improve. The Schweinfurt bombers sat grounded. By 10 in the morning, commanders faced an impossible choice: cancel the mission entirely or launch the Regensburg attack immediately to reach North African bases before darkness. They chose to launch. Colonel Curtis LeMay's 3rd Bombardment Wing took off into clearing weather, formed up, and headed for Germany. The Schweinfurt force remained grounded in fog. The 10-minute separation that would divide German defences had become a 3.5-hour gap. Instead of confusing Luftwaffe controllers, the new timing guaranteed that LeMay's bombers would face the full weight of German fighter defences on the way in, and the Schweinfurt force would face every available German fighter on the way home. German radar operators at the 12th Air Corps Underground Combat Control Center watched the developing attack with professional satisfaction. 146 B-17 seconds crossing the Dutch coast at 22,000 feet, following predictable routes toward German industrial targets. Fighter squadrons scrambled from bases across Holland and northern Germany. Ground controllers vectored them toward interception points calculated with mathematical precision. What happened next became known simply as the Gauntlet. Fokker Wolf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf 109s attacked in coordinated waves, focusing firepower on lead bombers, targeting engines and cockpits, pressing attacks to point-blank range before breaking away. Some German pilots developed head-on attack techniques, diving through bomber formations from 12 o'clock high, exploiting the B-17's relatively weak nose armament. The Americans called it company front attacks, entire Luftwaffe squadrons approaching in line abreast, filling the sky with cannon fire. Inside the bombers, bombardiers tried maintaining pre-mission procedures while their aircraft shook from cannon strikes and defensive machine gun fire. Staff Sergeant William Simpkins, aboard a 395th Bomb Group B-17, watched his navigator slump forward, killed by a 20mm cannon shell that penetrated the nose plexiglass. Blood splattered across the Norden's optics. Simpkins continued his calculations, wiping the lens with his glove, knowing that breaking formation or deviating from the bombing run meant the entire mission failed. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. At 11:40 in the morning, LeMay's bombers reached the initial point northwest of Regensburg and began their bomb runs. Control transferred from pilots to bombardiers. The Norden bombsights took over aircraft autopilots. 122 B-17 seconds flew straight and level, despite continuing fighter attacks, giving their bombardiers the stable platform required for accuracy. The bombing run lasted 22 minutes, 22 minutes of mechanical vulnerability, while German fighters exploited the Americans' self-imposed limitation. Second Lieutenant Grover Boyd, navigator aboard Battle Queen, watched through the nose as bombs fell away from the formation. The Messerschmitt factory below erupted in explosions and fire. Reconnaissance photographs would later confirm severe damage, 2/3 of the factory area destroyed, critical machinery wrecked, production of the revolutionary Me-262 jet fighter significantly delayed. By the standards of strategic bombing, Regensburg was a success, but success came with a price calculated in burning aircraft. 24 B-17 seconds from LeMay's force never reached North Africa. They fell across Germany, Austria, and occupied territories, trailing fire and smoke. Crews who survived German fighters and flak faced new challenges: shot-out engines, leaking fuel tanks, wounded men bleeding in unheated fuselages. First Lieutenant Stephen Rapport, pilot of Battle Queen, separated from the formation shortly after the target. German fighters had damaged his aircraft too severely for the long flight to Africa. He headed for neutral Switzerland, crash landing in a meadow near Utzenstorf with landing gear retracted. The Schweinfurt force finally took off at 11:20 in the morning, 3 hours after the Regensburg bombers had crossed into enemy territory. German radar operators tracked the new formation with clinical precision. Fighter squadrons that had attacked LeMay's bombers earlier were now refueled, rearmed, and positioned for maximum interception effectiveness. The Luftwaffe had learned from the morning's engagement. They knew American bomber formations maintained rigid discipline. They understood that P-47 Thunderbolt escorts had to turn back at the German border due to fuel limitations. They calculated exactly when and where the bombers would be most vulnerable. 230 B-17 seconds crossed the Dutch coast at 21,000 feet. German fighters waited. The attacks began over Belgium and continued without pause for the next 2 hours. Luftwaffe pilots focused on lead aircraft, knowing that destroying the lead bombardier would disrupt the entire formation's bombing accuracy. The Americans flew in combat box formations designed to provide overlapping defensive firepower, but German pilots had learned to attack from angles where American gunners couldn't effectively engage. Staff Sergeant Thomas Bennett, pilot of a 306th Bomb Group B-17, watched as fighters tore through his squadron. Aircraft fell from formation trailing debris and smoke. He counted 7 B-17 seconds shot down in less than 10 minutes. His bombardier called out fighter positions continuously: 2 o'clock high, 10 o'clock level, 6 o'clock low. a litany of threats that overwhelmed defensive capabilities. The 291st Bomb Group lost 13 of 16 aircraft in minutes. The bomber formation that had been tight and organized became ragged as damaged aircraft struggled to maintain position. Pilots faced impossible choices: stay in formation and present a stable target for German fighters, or break away and lose the protection of concentrated defensive fire. Most stayed, trading vulnerability for mutual support. At 2:53 in the afternoon, the Schweinfurt force reached its initial point. Despite catastrophic losses during the approach, the surviving bombers began their runs. Bombardiers took control through Norden bombsights. The target area spread across the town in scattered factory complexes near residential areas, precisely the kind of distributed target that challenged precision bombing doctrine. Each bombardier had to identify his specific aiming point through optical sights, while the aircraft maintained straight and level flight through intense flak and continuing fighter attacks. Second Lieutenant Robert Williams, bombardier aboard a 1st Bombardment Wing B-17, centered his crosshairs on what he believed was the main ball-bearing plant. The analog computer in his Norden calculated release point based on altitude, airspeed, and drift. At 2:56, he released his bombs. The aircraft lurched upward as 4 tons of high explosives fell away. Williams watched through his sight as bombs from the entire formation created a firestorm across Schweinfurt. But doubt crept in even as the bombs exploded. The factories were spaced apart. Smoke from early hits obscured later aiming points. Some bombardiers had aimed at the wrong buildings entirely, confusing residential structures for industrial targets. Others had released on signal from the lead aircraft without independent verification, the lead bomber procedure that trading precision for coordination. The promise of pickle barrel accuracy had dissolved into area bombing with better intentions. The return flight became a fighting retreat. German fighters pursued the bombers back to the Belgian border, attacking damaged aircraft that fell behind formation. The 3rd Bombardment Wing had to cross the Swiss Alps before the Luftwaffe broke off engagement. The 1st Bombardment Wing fought its way across Germany and occupied territories until P-47 escorts finally appeared near the Dutch coast. Total losses for August 17th told the story that training films never mentioned. 60 B-17 seconds failed to return 24 from the Regensburg force, 36 from Schweinfurt. Another 95 aircraft sustained battle damage, ranging from minor to catastrophic. 552 airmen were dead or captured. The Luftwaffe lost 27 fighters. German gunners claimed to have shot down over 200 American aircraft, a wild overestimate, but the kill claims reflected the intensity of the battle. Bombing accuracy at Schweinfurt failed to match expectations despite the enormous sacrifice. Post-mission reconnaissance showed that bombs had hit residential areas as often as factory complexes. Some aiming points remained completely untouched, others had suffered only minor damage. The mathematical promise of the Norden bombsight, precision sufficient to spare civilians and destroy only military targets, had proven impossible to achieve under combat conditions. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The October 14th follow-up raid on Schweinfurt, forever after known as Black Thursday, would prove even more devastating. 291 B-17 seconds attacked in better weather with improved escort coordination. German defences had grown stronger. 60 bombers failed to return, 17 more were damaged beyond repair. 121 sustained varying degrees of battle damage. 26% of the attacking force lost in a single mission. 22% of bomber crews, 650 men out of 2,900 killed or captured. The grim mathematics forced acknowledgement of reality. General Henry Hap Arnold claimed publicly that the loss of 60 bombers was incidental to the strategic objective. Privately, 8th Air Force commanders recognized they had temporarily lost air superiority over Germany. Deep penetration raids into German territory were suspended until the following February, when long-range P-51 Mustang escorts could finally provide fighter cover all the way to targets and back. The official post-war analysis revealed numbers that demolished the Norden bombsight's mythical reputation. The 8th Air Force, bombing from an average altitude of 21,000 feet, put only 31.8% of bombs within 1,000 feet of their aiming points. The 15th Air Force averaged 30.7% from 20,500 feet. The 20th Air Force against Japan managed 31% from 16,500 feet, 1,000 feet, not 75 feet, not pickle barrels, not precision sufficient to hit specific buildings or spare civilian areas, 1,000 feet, and that accuracy rate meant that roughly 2/3 of all bombs dropped fell farther than 1/5 of a mile from intended targets. Some errors measured in miles. Studies revealed that as few as 5% of 8th Air Force bombs actually fell within 1,000 feet of tactical targets during 1943 operations. The average error for 500-pound bombs dropped over Europe was 1,673 feet. The gap between promised and actual performance had multiple causes, each compounding the others. Combat conditions destroyed the stable flight requirements that Norden had designed for. Aircraft maneuvered constantly to avoid flak and fighters. Evasive action during the bomb run meant bombardiers lost their carefully established aim points and had to reacquire targets under time pressure. Prop wash from other aircraft in formation created turbulence that made precise sighting impossible. Equipment failures plagued operations. The Norden's complexity meant thousands of potential failure points. Gyroscopes drifted, electrical connections corroded, mechanical linkages froze in extreme cold, optical systems fogged. Analog computers produced erratic calculations when components wore beyond tolerances. Heated blankets for the bombsights drew power from aircraft electrical systems already stressed by defensive armament, communications equipment, and navigation instruments. Human factors exceeded technical limitations. Bombardiers operated under conditions of extreme stress that no training could fully prepare them for. Fear affected performance. Exhaustion accumulated across multiple missions. Cold impaired fine motor control and decision-making. Many bombardiers involuntarily rose from their seats as the release point approached, changing the optical path and introducing errors. The psychological weight of knowing that mistakes meant dead civilians or failed missions affected judgment in ways that couldn't be measured or corrected. Weather remained the insurmountable obstacle. Cloud cover over European targets averaged 60%. The Norden worked only when bombardiers could visually identify aiming points through optical sights. Bombing through clouds meant relying on radar systems like H-2X, called Mickey, by crews, which provided only crude target identification compared to optical precision. Coastal areas showed distinctive radar returns that allowed reasonable accuracy. Inland industrial targets appeared as indistinct blurs that made pinpoint bombing impossible. The lead bomber procedure emerged as an admission that individual precision was unachievable. Instead of each bombardier independently acquiring targets and releasing bombs based on his own Norden calculations, entire formations bombed on signal from a lead aircraft. The most experienced bombardier in the formation would sight the target. When he released, every other aircraft in the formation released simultaneously. This coordinated approach traded individual precision for concentrated impact, accepting area bombing effectiveness over pinpoint accuracy. Strategic bombing doctrine evolved to match operational reality rather than technological promise. By 1944, American planners had largely abandoned precision attacks on specific factories in favor of larger area targeting of industrial complexes, transportation networks, and urban centers. The British had already adopted area bombing, saturating entire cities with high explosives and incendiaries, rather than attempting to hit specific installations. American doctrine followed similar paths, despite official rhetoric about precision and minimizing civilian casualties. The Norden bombsight did achieve notable successes under optimal conditions. Naval operations in the Pacific, where targets were ships at sea with clear water backgrounds, showed better performance. The bombardier aboard Enola Gay used a Norden sight to deliver the atomic bomb on Hiroshima from 29,000 feet, though the weapon's destructive radius made precision largely irrelevant. Some daylight raids with clear weather, experienced crews, and minimal opposition achieved accuracy approaching the Norden's theoretical capabilities. But these successes represented exceptions rather than normal operations. The vast majority of bombs dropped during World War II fell nowhere near their intended impact points. The billion-dollar investment in Norden bombsights had produced a weapon that worked brilliantly in demonstrations and poorly in combat, that promised revolution and delivered incremental improvement, that claimed precision and achieved only slightly better accuracy than less sophisticated alternatives. German strategic bombing assessment, conducted after examining years of combat data, concluded that American daylight precision bombing had not significantly damaged German war production until 1944, and then primarily due to overwhelming numbers of bombers rather than accuracy improvements. German factories dispersed production facilities, hardened critical installations, and developed rapid repair capabilities that offset bombing damage faster than Americans could inflict it. The ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt, theoretically a bottleneck that precision bombing could exploit, continued production throughout the war despite repeated attacks. German engineers had stockpiled bearings, developed substitute materials, and dispersed manufacturing before American bombing campaigns could achieve decisive impact. The Messerschmitt factories at Regensburg suffered severe damage, but resumed limited production within a month and full production within 3 months. Strategic bombing succeeded through attrition and resource diversion rather than precision destruction of vital nodes. The mythology persisted anyway. Post-war accounts continued claiming the Norden had won the war through superior technology. Carl Norden's company promoted the device's legendary accuracy in advertising campaigns once secrecy. Restrictions lifted. Veterans' memoirs often repeated the pickle barrel stories, perhaps because believing in technological superiority helped reconcile the enormous human cost of the bombing campaign with its limited tactical effectiveness. The Korean War brought Norden bombsights back into service when B-29 superfortresses conducted conventional bombing operations. Retired World War II technicians had to be recalled to make the mothballed bombsights operational again. Performance remained similar to World War II results, better than crude systems, worse than promises, inadequate for truly precision work. The Vietnam War saw limited use of Nordens for dropping sensors along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, more for the stable platforms they provided than their precision capabilities. The final irony came during the Gulf War in 1991. Coalition forces dropped 210,000 conventional bombs, with average errors exceeding 300 feet, no better than World War II performance, despite half a century of technological advancement. Only precision-guided munitions with laser or GPS guidance achieved the accuracy that the Norden had promised but never delivered. It took smart bombs, not smart bombsights, to finally drop ordnance into pickle barrels from 20,000 feet. The fundamental problem had always been physics, not engineering. Unguided bombs falling through atmosphere face inherent variables that no analog computer can fully compensate for. Air density changes with altitude and temperature. Wind speeds and directions vary through different atmospheric layers. The bomb's own ballistic characteristics, shape, weight distribution, and rotational stability create unpredictable deviations. Release timing errors of hundredths of seconds translate into 100-foot impacts at ground level. Carl Norden had understood these limitations even while promoting his device's capabilities. His perfectionism drove continuous improvements throughout the war: better gyroscopes, more accurate optics, refined autopilot linkages. But he couldn't defeat atmospheric physics or eliminate human factors under combat stress. The gap between laboratory precision and battlefield accuracy remained insurmountable for unguided weapons, regardless of how sophisticated the sighting mechanisms became. The $1 billion spent on Norden bombsights bought something other than advertised precision. It bought a device that worked well enough to justify American strategic bombing doctrine. It bought technological confidence that helped maintain morale among bomber crews facing appalling casualties. It bought propaganda value that convinced Congress and the public that daylight precision bombing could achieve military objectives while minimizing civilian casualties, even when actual results contradicted the claims. Most importantly, the Norden bought time for American industrial capacity to overwhelm German defenses through sheer numbers. When individual bombing accuracy remained poor, sending thousands of bombers instead of hundreds achieved similar results through area saturation rather than precision strikes. The math was brutal but effective. If only 30% of bombs fell within 1,000 feet of targets, send enough bombs to ensure that 30% represented destructive tonnage sufficient to achieve military objectives. The real heroes of the strategic bombing campaign weren't the bombsights, but the men who flew them into enemy fire day after day despite knowing the mathematics. They understood, long before post-war analysis confirmed it, that precision bombing was mostly myth. They watched their accuracy degrade under combat conditions. They saw bombs scatter across residential areas despite aiming at factories. They knew that staying straight and level for that critical 60-second bomb run made them targets for every German gun within range. But they flew anyway. They centered crosshairs on targets obscured by smoke and cloud. They made delicate adjustments to gyroscopes while cannon shells punched through fuselage metal. They maintained professional focus while friends died in aircraft burning beside them. The courage wasn't in believing the technology would protect them, it was in continuing the mission after learning it wouldn't. Second Lieutenant Thomas Ferebee, who began this story squinting through a Norden bombsight over Regensburg, survived his 22 missions despite statistical probabilities that said he should have died by mission 11. He knew his bombsight was compromised technology, knew the accuracy was mythology, knew the pickle barrel promises were advertising rather than operational reality, but he centered his crosshairs, made his calculations, and released his bombs with professional precision on every mission. That professionalism, repeated across thousands of bomber crews and hundreds of thousands of missions, mattered more than the technology it employed. The Norden bombsight didn't win the war through revolutionary accuracy. It helped win the war by providing a tool good enough to keep bomber crews focused on their missions despite appalling losses, by maintaining the strategic bombing campaign until American industrial production could overwhelm German defenses, and by creating confidence, however misplaced, that technological superiority could overcome battlefield chaos. The device remains one of the most famous bombsights in history, not because it achieved its promised precision, but because it represented something larger. It embodied American faith in technology as a solution to military challenges. It demonstrated the gap between laboratory performance and combat reality. It showed how classified programs could become myths disconnected from actual effectiveness. And it proved that sometimes winning requires not revolutionary weapons but ordinary men doing extraordinary things with imperfect tools under impossible conditions. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.